So this is the ferry between Bainbridge Island, Washington, and Seattle, Washington. I live on Bainbridge Island and take this ferry quite frequently. And it always reminds me of how it's really a bridge from one world to another. It takes us from a very tranquil, rural, idealistic environment over to the big city, which is Seattle. Two very, very different worlds, 35 minutes apart on this ferry. Doesn't take much to make that transition. And it just always makes me think of what I call the perception bridge, which takes us from one reality to another reality. If you start with reality one, objective reality one, and you look at it a certain way, it takes you to the subjective reality two. If you change the way you look at it, that changes everything. I often think of George Washington and the American Revolution. So in 1773, everybody in the colonies just about believed that the British were invincible. The largest, most powerful army in the world couldn't be defeated. Washington recalled a time back 20 years earlier during the French and Indian War when a huge British army under one of their best generals, General Braddock, was defeated by a handful of Indians and a few Frenchmen. Braddock himself was killed. Washington went before the Continental Congress and he said, "They're not invincible. All we got to do is hide behind trees." They stand up out there in these red coats, just targets asking to be shot at. It changed everything. But the reality hadn't changed. There's still this powerful British army and a handful of militia people, but their perception changed. We can beat them. All we got to do is change the way we look at warfare. That's this crossing this perception bridge. The same objective reality, new perception, took you to a different reality. There's no real such thing as the United States versus Mexico or Russia or China. There are really no countries except as we perceive them. There's no corporations. There's no economies except as we perceive them. And when enough people accept a perception or codify it into law, then it has a huge impact on objective reality. As an economic hitman, what I knew was that countries that I went to, our corporations wanted their resources. I needed to convince the leaders of those countries to accept huge loans. But the money would never actually go to the country. It would go to our own corporations to build big infrastructure projects in those countries. The country would be swamped in debt ultimately. You go back and say, since you can't pay your debt, sell your resources real cheap to our corporations without any environmental or social regulations. Or let us build a military base on your soil. And the way I did this was to go to the president of these countries and say, hey, you've got oil or some other resources our corporations want, and we're going to give you a big loan. And with that loan, you're going to hire our companies to build power plants, highways, industrial parks, or infrastructure that'll make your economy grow. And you look very good in the eyes of your people. So there was this perception, take these resources, go deep into debt, and you create over here economic growth. And it did that. But what the statistics didn't show was that the majority of the people lost out because in trying to pay off debt service, the government had to take money away from education, healthcare, and other social services. But there was this perception of growth. And in a way today we can say that we have a world that's filled with human and natural resources. And the perceived reality is that our corporations need to exploit these resources in a way that will maximize shareholder profit. That's a perception that came about in 1976. It really codified in 1976. It had been growing before then, but it really codified when Milton Friedman won the Nobel Prize in economics. And he said, amongst other things, the only responsibility of business is to maximize profits regardless of the social and environmental costs. So he had this objective reality, human, natural resources, perceived reality, corporations use these to maximize profits. Then we get a reality which has now become what we call the death economy. It's consuming itself into extinction. It's using up all the resources upon which it's based, and it's creating rising oceans, melting glaciers, and all the other problems and crises that we know. So all we really have to do is change that perception and say, hey, yes, we've got this world that's filled with human and natural resources, and our new perception has to be we use these resources to clean up pollution, to regenerate destroyed environments, to create new technologies that no longer dig up the earth, that recycle. They use all kinds of new technologies, the sun, the air, to create energy, transportation, everything. New perception that businesses' responsibility is not to maximize profits, shareholder profits, but instead give a decent rate of return to investors and use that money to create a life economy, to create an economy that is itself a renewable resource, and that our children and grandchildren will thank us for. So this ferry is really symbolic of that. Every time I take it, I'm reminded of how that ferry represents the ability to just very quickly move from one reality to another.